Russian military is tightening its grip on Ukraine, executing a series of rapid advances. In the Kursk region,
мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
3:18 a.m., January 27, 2026, Kharkiv region, 15 kilometers underground, 9 hours crawling in darkness. Toxic residue inside a dead gas pipeline. Fewer than 100 Russian soldiers are still alive in Kupiansk. This was Moscow's brilliant idea. Send troops through abandoned pipelines, slip past drones, outsmart Ukrainian defenses, feed the illusion of control to generals watching maps on screens. Meanwhile, Ukraine mapped every meter, flooded the exits, and turned each opening into a kill zone. Russian soldiers now emerge poisoned, shaking, barely conscious, only to be tracked and eliminated within minutes. This wasn't smart warfare. This was desperation wrapped in stupidity. Like the video, subscribe, because what happened in those pipes explains how this war is really being lost.
On paper, the plan looked elegant. In practice, it was arithmetic suicide. The pipeline under the Oskil River measures roughly 15 kilometers end to end. Internal diameter, about 1.4 meters. Average crawl time per soldier, 7 to 9 hours depending on congestion, oxygen levels, and panic. That means a single file of men with an estimated speed of 2 kilometers per hour on a good stretch. Russian units attempted to push groups of 10 to 25 soldiers at a time through the pipe. Even under ideal conditions, that caps throughput at 40 to 60 men per day. Kupiansk's Ukrainian defenders, by contrast, rotate platoons and drone teams measured in hundreds, not dozens. The math never favored Russia. It only looked acceptable on slides. Conditions inside the pipe were brutal. Residual hydrocarbons and industrial residue remained embedded in the metal. Ukrainian medical reports later described symptoms consistent with chemical exposure: dizziness, vomiting, disorientation, respiratory distress. Soldiers emerged after 8 hours underground with slowed reaction times and impaired coordination. Exactly the state you do not want when stepping into a combat zone watched by drones. The pipeline had a limited number of exits, fewer than a dozen viable openings within sprint distance of cover. Fixed geometry. Fixed locations. Once Ukraine mapped them, the game was over. Mapping took weeks, not months, using old infrastructure schematics and drone reconnaissance. After that, every exit became predictable. Ukraine's response was not dramatic. It was systematic. In November, drone teams dropped 15-kilogram munitions on underwater sections, flooding key segments. Water flow reduced usable passages by an estimated 30 to 40%. New Russian cut-ins appeared, but each one created noise, soil displacement, and thermal signatures detectable within hours, not days. When pipelines clogged, Russia reverted to rafts. Crossing the Oskil River on inflatables exposes soldiers for 3 to 5 minutes, an eternity. Drone footage reviewed by independent analysts shows loss rates exceeding 70% per crossing attempt during peak Ukrainian surveillance windows. That means for every 10 men sent, 7 never reached cover. By January, fewer than 100 Russian soldiers were assessed to remain inside Kupiansk at any one time. Not battalions, not companies. Scattered pairs and trios hiding in basements. Ukraine, meanwhile, controlled approximately 90% of the city, according to multiple battlefield assessments. The cost exchange was grotesque. Russia burned manpower measured in hundreds to sustain infiltration gains measured in meters. Ukraine used drones costing a few $1,000s to eliminate soldiers who had already endured 9 hours underground just to surface exhausted and poisoned. This was never smart warfare. It was concealment masquerading as strategy. Pipelines did not give Russia surprise, they gave Ukraine a schedule. And once a war becomes predictable, it becomes unwinnable. What Russia attempted in Kupiansk was not improvisation. It was desperation dressed up as innovation. Pipeline infiltration was sold up the chain as a brilliant workaround to Ukraine's drone dominance. Russian field commanders claimed it could bypass thermal sensors, evade aerial surveillance, and quietly seed troops deep inside contested urban zones. On paper, it looked clever. In reality, it was a logistical hallucination. Let's look at the numbers Moscow did not want to show. Each infiltration run through the pipeline took 7 to 9 hours per group. Oxygen levels inside dropped below 17%, enough to cause dizziness and impaired motor function. Toxic residue from decades-old gas sediment coated the interior walls. Soldiers emerged dehydrated, coughing, disoriented, some vomiting before they could even raise a rifle. This was not stealth insertion, it was slow-motion self-destruction, and worse, it was predictable. Ukraine did not need guesswork. The pipeline network feeding Kupiansk had existed on engineering maps for decades. By November 2025, Ukrainian units had already identified 12 primary exit points within a 3-kilometer radius of the city. Drones were pre-positioned, explosives were calibrated, flooding charges were tested. Once the pipeline strategy was confirmed, Ukraine did not rush to destroy it. They waited. Because a pipeline is more useful as a funnel than a target. By late December, Ukrainian drone units recorded over 140 Russian soldiers emerging from pipeline exits across multiple nights. Within minutes, over 70% were neutralized before reaching cover. The rest scattered into basements and ruins, tracked by thermal drones and ground sensors. The city became a hunting ground. This is where the stupidity compounds. The Russian command did not stop sending men. Internal communications intercepted in early January show at least 6 separate reinforcement orders issued after losses were already confirmed. Each order assumed the previous unit had failed due to bad timing or local error, not structural failure. No one wanted to report the truth upward. The plan was dead. By January 20th, fewer than 100 Russian soldiers were estimated to still be alive inside Kupiansk. Many were isolated in basements without resupply. Ammunition was rationed. Batteries died. Radios failed. Some groups reportedly avoided moving at all, fearing drones more than starvation. This is not battlefield fog. This is command paralysis. Ukraine, meanwhile, adapted faster. Pipeline exits were no longer bombed immediately. Instead, drones waited. Soldiers emerging were allowed to stagger forward, collapse, attempt to regroup, then struck. It conserved munitions and maximized psychological damage. Every Russian soldier entering the pipe now knew 2 things. Ukraine was watching, and survival odds were collapsing by the hour. This is the moment where Russia's illusion of cleverness imploded. A state that claims to be fighting a modern war resorted to sending men crawling through toxic tunnels built for gas, not humans. A command structure that boasts strategic depth could not admit failure fast enough to stop the bleeding. And a plan designed to outsmart drones ended up feeding them. Kupiansk did not fall because Ukraine was stronger everywhere. It held because Russia proved again that pretending to be smart is not the same as being smart. And in this war, stupidity is lethal. Kupiansk is no longer about tactics, it is about truth, and Moscow's inability to control it. For months, the Kremlin's power has rested on a single assumption, that narrative control can substitute for battlefield reality. That assumption collapses the moment a city like Kupiansk refuses to stay captured on television while remaining firmly Ukrainian on the ground. This is where the pipeline strategy becomes something darker than a bad idea. It becomes a political instrument, used not to win, but to delay the moment of admission. Kupiansk mattered because it was leveraged. Control of the city would have allowed Moscow to claim momentum in the Kharkiv direction, to hint at renewed pressure on Donbass logistics, and to present itself as still advancing rather than stagnating. Losing that claim strips Russia of the negotiating weight it desperately needs. And so the order was not to retreat. The order was to persist. Not because it worked, but because stopping would force commanders to report failure upward. In today's Russian military system, admitting failure carries more risk than losing soldiers. Careers survive losses. Careers do not survive honesty. This is how bad ideas fossilize into doctrine. Instead of reassessing, Russian command structures repeated the same approach, hoping persistence would manufacture success. But modern war does not reward repetition, it punishes predictability. Ukraine did not need to guess Russia's next move. Russia announced it through habit. What followed was not combat, it was erosion. Small infiltration groups that achieved nothing strategically still consumed resources politically. Each loss required explanation. Each explanation required distortion. Each distortion widened the gap between reality and reporting. Eventually, even internal messaging began to fracture. This is the invisible defeat. When soldiers know the mission no longer aligns with outcomes, morale collapses quietly, not in mutiny, but in hesitation, exhaustion, and survival thinking. Units stop fighting to advance. They fight to endure. That shift is lethal to any offensive force. Kupiansk also exposed something else Moscow cannot easily repair: credibility. Allies watch outcomes, not speeches. Ukraine demonstrated it can absorb pressure, adapt, and reverse momentum with limited resources. Russia demonstrated it cannot abandon failed objectives even when costs exceed gains. That imbalance reshapes how every future claim from Moscow is evaluated. This is why the loss of Kupiansk resonates far beyond one city. It signals that Russia is no longer choosing where to fight, only where to bleed. It signals a command system trapped by its own propaganda. And it signals that Ukraine now dictates the tempo not just of battle, but of truth. Wars do not end when armies collapse. They end when strategies stop making sense, and leaders refuse to admit it. Kupiansk is where that refusal became visible. Not dramatic, not explosive, just undeniable. And that is why this defeat matters more than 100 tactical losses elsewhere. Kupiansk didn't fall because Russia lacked soldiers. It didn't fall because Moscow lacked weapons. It fell because the system running this war cannot learn. When a strategy fails, a functioning military adapts. When it keeps failing, a failing system doubles down. Not to win, but to avoid admitting defeat. That is what you just witnessed. Russian soldiers were sent into darkness not to take territory, but to preserve a narrative. Not to advance the front, but to delay accountability. Lives were spent not for victory, but for appearances. And Ukraine understood this weakness perfectly. They didn't just counter a tactic. They exposed a mindset. A system where propaganda outranks planning. Where loyalty matters more than competence. Where truth is more dangerous than loss. Kupiansk is no longer a battlefield. It is a mirror. A mirror showing what happens when arrogance replaces strategy and fear replaces command. When leaders cannot say stop, even when the cost is obvious. This war will not be decided by who has more men or more metal. It will be decided by who can think, adapt, and tell the truth faster. And right now, that is not Moscow. Stay alert, stay critical, and keep looking past the headlines, because the real story of this war is written in the mistakes leaders keep repeating.